They come in every color, creed, and cause, but beneath the polished speeches and campaign smiles, some politicians are nothing more than wolves in suits. While the public grows increasingly skeptical, a few still manage to slip through the cracks, masking their agendas, rallying zealots, and surrounding themselves with blind followers. This is the story of one such figure, a politician who should have never gotten close to power, let alone held it. Who is Kamala Harris? What is her background? What was her ideological outlook? Why were many of her actions controversial, if not criminal? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. Kamala Harris was born October 20, 1964 in Oakland, California, to immigrant parents. Her father was an openly Marxist economics professor at Stanford University, and both parents were active supporters of the Afro-American Association, which openly supported Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, and see our video on Che Guevara. Kamala and her sister Maya were both communist activists on campus and were connected to communist Steve Phillips, leader of the pro-communist Chinese League of Revolutionary Struggle at Stanford. Phillips married into the Sandler family, owners of Golden West Savings and Loan. They fund left-wing candidates. Harris graduated from Howard University and the University of California Hastings College of Law and was recruited to the San Francisco District Attorney's Office in Alameda, California. After graduating from college, Harris became the mistress of the then 60-year-old married Speaker of the California Assembly, Willie Brown, Jr., who was supported by communists such as Dr. Carlton Goodlett, who owned the Sun Reporter and a few other pro-communist newspapers. When Brown was elected mayor of San Francisco, he brought Harris with him, as he endorsed her Marxist philosophy and mentored her as she rose in California politics. Brown and the Democrat communist helped Harris become the DA of San Francisco in 2003, but several questionable events, even illegal actions, were at play. Harris's future campaigns would be funded by Phillips and other pro-communist groups, who also funded Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. Brown's entire political career was supported by communists, and today Brown is considered Communist China's best friend in California. Harris was also supported by left-wing communists, and she was elected Attorney General of California in 2010 and re-elected as Attorney General in 2014. While she was DA, Harris mentored Latifah Simon, a devoted Maoist and member of the Storm Revolutionary Movement. Simon later became chairperson on the board of the Bay Area Rapid Transit Authority. Harris maintained a close friendship with Black Lives Matter founder and dedicated self-avowed Marxist Alicia Garza, and see our video on Black Lives Matter and Garza. Harris openly supported BLM and Antifa's terrorist actions and created the bail fund to get both BLM and Antifa criminals out of jail to continue their rampages. See our video on Antifa. Now, elected members of Congress do not undergo the same FBI security background checks that military personnel and government defense contractors do. Due to her 4 decades of close associations with known communist, Marxist, Maoist, and criminal activity, as a DA and later as AG, she could have never entered a military service academy or obtained a security clearance. Another massive security threat is her husband, Doug Emhoff, part of the DLA law firm with over 30 years of work with Communist China and with 140 lawyers dedicated to its China Investment Services branch. Emhoff was appointed as a professor at Yale University Law School, where he educates up-and-coming lawyers on the finer points of communism. Go figure. He would not pass a security background check either. When Harris was elected to the Senate, she selected pro-communist activist Karine Jean-Pierre, then the Senate Chief of Staff, for consideration as White House spokesperson. Then VP Harris cast the deciding vote in the Senate in March 2021 to pass the Green New Deal scam, which cost taxpayers about $2 trillion and created the highest inflation in 40 years. None of those funds went to positive or viable projects, but instead sent taxpayer money to Democrat cronies and supported liberal social and political programs. Her other platform was Medicare for All, a government single-payer system that would have eliminated private health insurance for most Americans, closed many hospitals, many more would be forced to lay off employees, including doctors and nurses, and had an estimated cost of $44 trillion over 10 years. It would have exploded unemployment rates in the medical fields and bankrupted the nation. During the primary debate in 2020, Senator and presidential hopeful Joseph Biden, and see our 4-part videos on him, alluded to a crime lab scandal that involved Harris's district attorney's office and resulted in more than 1,000 drug cases being dismissed. Biden claimed that 1,000 drug cases had to be dismissed when Harris was DA. And it's accurate, although Harris denied knowing about the problems with the crime lab that triggered those dismissals until the issue became public knowledge. This was a lie. Longtime San Francisco public defender Jeff Adachi criticized Harris's handling of the crime lab situation back in 2010, and during a January interview in 2024 with the Sacramento Bee, he explained this. The San Francisco drug lab was shut down after a lead technician who testified on behalf of prosecutors on drug cases was found to have systematically mishandled the drug samples seized from suspects and even consuming some herself. While the San Francisco Police Department was responsible for running the lab and not Harris's DA office, a court ruled in 2010 that the district attorney's office violated defendants' constitutional rights by not disclosing to defense attorneys and the court what it knew about the tainted drug evidence. Judge Ann Christine Masulo wrote in her decision that prosecutors at the highest levels of the district attorney's office knew that Madden was not a dependable witness at trial and that there were serious concerns regarding the crime lab. Of course, Harris denied being aware of the drug lab issues at the time and also noted that her office implemented a Brady policy only after the drug lab scandal came to her attention. A Brady policy refers to Brady versus Maryland, a case in which exculpatory evidence or any evidence that may be deemed helpful to the defense must be disclosed. Many were friends and political donors and supporters. This was similar to the Duke lacrosse case in Durham, North Carolina, and DA Michael Nifong, and see our video on the Duke lacrosse case. During the 2019 Democratic presidential debate, Representative and presidential hopeful Tulsi Gabbard sharply criticized Kamala Harris's record as California Attorney General, stating, "She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so." Gabbard was referring to the case of Kevin Cooper, a black man sentenced to death for the 1983 murders of 4 people in Chino Hills, California. Cooper came within hours of execution in 2004. Years later, mounting questions about the case led to a 2018 New York Times article by journalist Nicholas Kristof, which alleged that police may have framed Cooper and that Harris, during her tenure as Attorney General, had refused to allow new DNA testing that could potentially exonerate him. After the article's publication, Harris called Kristof and repeatedly said, "I feel awful about this." She also issued a public statement urging authorities to allow the testing, a reversal that many viewed as politically motivated given her rising national profile. While Cooper's guilt or innocence remains legally unresolved, critics argue that Harris failed to pursue all available evidence in the case. According to the Wall Street Journal, she had also ignored a 2005 recommendation from her staff to adopt a policy aligned with the Brady Doctrine, which would have required her office to disclose potentially exculpatory evidence to defendants. In February 2019, California Governor Gavin Newsom ordered new DNA testing in the case. However, after the court approved the testing, critical pieces of evidence, including Cooper's clothing, were discovered missing from the police evidence locker. Harris has never explained why she opposed the testing initially during her tenure as Attorney General, and no one can explain where the evidence went, but many observers believe political calculation played a role. Harris then had another issue. The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 against the state in favor of a group founded by conservative donors Charles and David Koch, called the Americans for Prosperity Foundation. The foundation, along with the Thomas More Law Center, sued Attorney General Harris for enforcing a state law requiring them to disclose the names of their biggest donors, when Democrat donors were not required to disclose such information. The ruling had an immediate effect on charitable donors who want to keep their identities hidden from state authorities, although the IRS still requires federal disclosure. Some campaign ethics watchdogs believe the High Court's decision could eventually upend rules that require big donors to disclose their political giving to the public. This would help eliminate dark money. During Harris's 13-year tenure as district attorney and then attorney general, she failed to prosecute even one case of priest sexual abuse, although over 50 California cities brought charges against priests during that period. In 2010, Kamala Harris, then San Francisco district attorney, was running for California Attorney General, and for some reason, her record of covering up sex abuse records belonging to the San Francisco Archdiocese was never part of the political news of her record. She had media cover. Rick Simmons, an attorney who represented victims of clergy sexual abuse in California, said Harris's action of covering up documents on the cases shows a pattern and practice and policy of ignoring the rights of children by one of the largest institutions of the city and county of San Francisco and in the Bay Area. Later, in her convention speech, Harris claimed, "As a young courtroom prosecutor in Oakland, California, I stood up for women and children against predators who abused them." Really? However, investigative journalist Peter Schweitzer revealed that in addition to campaign donations from multiple law firms defending San Francisco priests against abuse claims, multiple board members of San Francisco Catholic Archdiocese-related organizations donated another $50,950 to Harris's campaign. Schweitzer said, "Harris had no particular ties to the Catholic Church or Catholic organizations, but the money still came in large, unprecedented sums." The total amount contributed by the Catholic Archdiocese was never really fully disclosed. Schweitzer alleged that connections Harris had with powerful people within the Archdiocese influenced her to bury the records with allegations against the priest. He also wrote, her office would strangely hide vital records on abuses that had occurred. The Democrats rallied to defend her, saying, District Attorney Harris focuses her efforts on putting child molesters in prison. Her office stated, in an effort to refute those claims of ignorance of the situation or even the cover-up, "We're not interested in selling out our victims to look good in the paper." Her predecessor and opponent in that race, Hallinan, had been pursuing abuse cases against the church. Catholics afraid of his investigations backed Kamala Harris in the race. The records that Hallinan had in his possession touched on well-connected institutions at the heart of California's power structure. St. Ignatius College Preparatory School in the Archdiocese of San Francisco counted former California Governor Jerry Brown and the powerful Getty family, to include Gavin Newsom, his connections to them, as alumni. The school faced enormous vulnerabilities because of abuse problems there. Based on documents later released by the Jesuits who ran St. Ignatius in the early 60-year span from 1923 to 1982, in 43 of those years, the school had cases of abuse by priests against children. Hallinan's investigation threatened to bring dozens of additional cases to light. Hallinan believed that the clergy abuse files were a matter of public record. Harris refused to release them to the public. Hallinan's pursuit brought forward a wave of victims who said they had been raped or molested by clergy over the years. Just months after opening his inquiry, Hallinan used a grand jury to begin issuing indictments. Victims groups were outraged by her actions, Schweitzer argued. Far from protecting victims, they argued, the cover-up was actually protecting the abusers by keeping their alleged crimes secret. One might have thought Harris, whose anti-Catholic instincts led her as a senator to harass Donald Trump's judicial nominee to the Supreme Court for nothing more than having membership in the Knights of Columbus, and would have enjoyed prosecuting the church for sexual abuse. But she didn't. Why? Because they donated heavily to her campaign. Harris also received money from church fixer Joseph Rossaniello and the law firm of Cooley Godward, where he served as a partner. Harris then tapped Rossaniello for her advisory board. Another law firm, writes Schweitzer, Bingham McCutcheon, which handled legal matters for the archdiocese concerning Catholic charities, donated $2,825, the maximum allowed, or at least what was disclosed. Arguedas, Castman, and Headley, a firm representing a priest in an abuse case at the time, also donated $4,550 to Harris. The lawyer in the case, Christina Arguedas, also served on Kamala Harris's advisory council, Schweitzer wrote. After Hallinan lost to Harris, the fate of the investigation into Catholic priest abuse would dramatically change, and not for the better, according to Schweitzer. Harris quickly buried Hallinan's abuse investigations. Harris, who had been a sexual crimes prosecutor early in her career, moved in the opposite direction of Hallinan and worked to cover up the records. In fact, she sealed them. Unbelievably, while running for vice president, Kamala Harris bragged about her supposed passion for helping victims of sexual abuse while speaking at the Democrat National Convention. That was when Tulsi Gabbard struck, highlighting her track record of failing to prosecute sexual abuse cases within the Catholic Church and even hiding vital records on abuses that had occurred when she was a San Francisco district attorney. In fact, she sealed the records forever. In another case, lawyers under the oversight of then Attorney General Kamala Harris's lawyers argued early release from prison would harm the prison's labor program, which included its work program to help fight California wildfires. The judges rejected the argument. Basically, Harris wanted to keep inmates in who were eligible for parole for slave labor. One case was illustrative of Harris's hypocrisy on the death penalty. Officer Isaac Espinoza and his partner were in plain clothes when they approached a man in their unmarked vehicle on April 10, 2004. Espinoza, then age 29, stepped out and flashed a light at David Hill, according to accounts at trial. Hill fired several rounds from an AK-47. Two struck Espinoza, killing him. Espinoza's partner was injured, and Hill was arrested and accused of first-degree murder along with other charges. The newly elected DA, Harris, despite her reluctance to pursue the death penalty against Hill, consistent with her position while she campaigned for the office, was offensive to many who attended Espinoza's funeral. This is not the only definition of tragedy. It's the special circumstance called for by the death penalty, former Democrat Senator Dianne Feinstein told the mourners, provoking a resounding standing ovation. This was in contradiction to her fellow Democrat Kamala Harris. The decision pitted Harris against the police. Isaac paid the ultimate price, said San Francisco Police Officers Association President Gary DeLagnes at the funeral, and I speak for all officers in demanding that his killer also pay the ultimate price. The trial jury rejected the charge of first-degree murder, not finding the act premeditated, and Hill's conviction and life sentence were upheld in 2011. Harris also oversaw another case that placed her credibility into question. A woman named Priscilla Lualamaga claimed to have witnessed a fatal July 2007 shooting of Jamal Chulov's friend Sue Kuka, who was shot in the back in July 2007 at San Francisco's Sunnydale housing development, and she told police that she saw the event. But there was a problem. Lualamaga had initially identified a different man as the shooter in a photo lineup. Later, for whatever reason, she changed her story with police support and said she was convinced that Jamal Chulov was the shooter. This was after the police showed her another photo lineup and told her the shooter was in that lineup, and Lualamaga said Chulov, whom she knew as a neighbor, looks like the guy who could have shot the victim. When the case went to trial in 2010, the DA's office put both Lualamaga and her sister in witness protection and advertised it in the media, citing alleged threats to taint the jury. There were no threats, it was covering their collective sixes. The appellate court later wrote, there was no evidence of any threats or any other actual danger presented by defendant, his friends, or his family to Lualamaga or her family. There was no forensic evidence linking Chulov to the crime, only Lualamaga testimony, which was the only evidence presented. The police and DA failed to mention that Lualamaga had failed to ID Chulov in the first photo lineup, which was a Brady violation. And make no mistake, Kamala Harris was deeply involved in this case, which was politically hot, and Truelove was convicted and sentenced to 50 years to life. Truelove recounted after his conviction, quote, "I'll never forget when I turned around and I looked, and I seen Kamala Harris. We locked eyes this one time and she laughed. She literally just kind of busted out laughing." But later that case began to unravel. On appeal, Truelove accused 4 San Francisco police officers of framing him. An 8-member jury in Oakland heard 3 weeks of testimony and deliberated for 2 days before unanimously finding that the 2 lead homicide inspectors on the case, Michael Johnson and Maureen D'Amico, had violated Truelove's rights by fabricating evidence against him, witness tampering, and withholding exculpatory evidence. On the appeal, a ballistics expert testified that Lou Alamaga, the only eyewitness claiming to have seen Truelove commit the crime and at the scene, could not have observed the shooting from the direction she was facing given the round's trajectory and her location. Harris ensured that the crooked cops suffered no criminal charges. The jurors found no wrongdoing by a 3rd inspector, Robert McMillan, or by Officer John Evans, the crime scene investigator. All 4 officers are now retired. Truelove was acquitted in March 2015 and went on to be an actor and had a role in the film The Last Black Man in San Francisco. A federal lawsuit he filed after his release, noting that he was stabbed in prison when he failed to give his cell's bottom bunk to a gang leader, cost the city and county of San Francisco $13 million in reparations. In another case, that of Efren Velasco Palacios, he was accused of lewd and lascivious conduct with a child, meaning a conviction could trigger a life sentence, and Attorney General Harris, who had sealed the cases against priests accused of the same crime, went after him viciously. Later, it was proven that a Kern County prosecutor named Robert Murray invented 2 lines of supposedly incriminating testimony during Palacios' interrogation in 2013. Murray sent the falsified transcript to the defendant's public defender. When the public defender discovered the fabrication, he successfully argued to get the case dismissed, but Harris's Justice Department appealed. Their unbelievable argument was, the charges shouldn't have been dismissed because, while the prosecutor did fake the lines, he didn't physically assault Velasco Palacios. Dismissal is an appropriate sanction for government misconduct that is egregious enough to prejudice a defendant's constitutional rights, the California Court of Appeals found in 2015. Harris's response? Get this. On appeal, however, the people dispute that the prosecutor's misconduct was outrageous or conscience-shocking in a constitutional sense, as it was not physically brutal. So, according to Harris, it's okay to create evidence and lie about a man to frame him only because he was not beaten. The appellate court justices said it found no support for that argument. If Harris really thinks that knowingly producing a fraudulent document to secure an illicit advantage isn't outrageous, then perhaps she slept through her legal ethics courses, wrote Glenn Harlan Reynolds, a University of Tennessee law professor, in 2015. For Murray himself, he described his actions to the state bar court as a joke and a prank. Really. The bar recommended a 2-year suspension. Murray later worked at the Office of the Inspector General and has had an active law license since 2018, according to the State Bar website. No criminal penalty for falsifying evidence against an innocent man, and Harris covered for him. Kamala Harris built her career on a public image of progress, justice, and accountability. But behind the speeches and slogans lies a record filled with political opportunism, prosecutorial misconduct, and questionable alliances. From refusing to release exculpatory evidence to shielding abusers to prioritizing political optics over the truth, Harris has repeatedly chosen ambition over integrity. She didn't just fail upward, she was protected, promoted, and polished by a system more interested in power than truth and accountability. History may forget the slogans, but it rarely forgets the truth. Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.